The American Theater Wing and the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts bring you the American Theater Wing's Guide to Careers in the Theater. This session, The Playwright.
I'm Ted Chapin, and with me today is Edward Albee, one of America's foremost playwrights. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Since this is a program about how-to, I thought I'd start with the basic question, how does one become a playwright?
The answer is sad. One is born a playwright. There are all kinds of creativity. Some people are born poets, some people are born novelists, some people are born playwrights, some are born sculptors, painters, composers. Some people are even born Republicans. I teach playwriting. I run playwriting workshops. And I choose my own students. They submit scripts, and I choose them. And I can tell very, very quickly by reading a play whether it's been written by somebody who is a natural playwright or somebody who has been taught how other playwrights write.
Now,
I always turn down the ones that aren't playwrights, the ones that have been taught how other playwrights write.
So what another way of saying that is that you can find a voice even if the technique is sloppy?
Of course. I'm much more interested in that germ of creativity that identifies a playwright than I am in highly polished imitative scripts.
Yeah.
You know, so many people who are novelists write a play and think that they can become playwrights, and they're lousy playwrights usually, and most playwrights write lousy novels, Beckett being the exception to all of this. But I think it's being in any of the arts and practicing any of the arts has to do with what your eyes and your mind and your ears tell you about consciousness.
Oh, I think. Do you feel that a play starts with an idea? Does it start with a concept? Does it start with characters?
I find that unless you're a highly didactic playwright who says, now I must write a play about this or that, and you can usually tell these plays because they're rather cumbersome, a play begins in the unconscious, and so you don't really know what begins it. Very, very seldom have I known why I'm suddenly thinking about writing a play. Obviously, part of my mind has made all the decisions that I'm going to write a play about some things before I'm aware of it.
Well, that's great. Now, you teach in Houston, right?
At the University of Houston.
And you've been doing that for a number of years.
About 15 years now.
And
13.
I love the quote in the biography of you that you teach to learn. But when you get those, I assume that in an academic situation, you have to be a teacher of those playwrights who you don't think are playwrights as well as those.
No, not at all. One of the conditions that I made when I took the job, well, I made a couple of conditions, only two of which concern us. One was I only wanted to teach the spring semester, because that's the only decent weather in Houston. And B, that I wanted to choose my own students. I wanted to teach and work with only those that I thought, A, were playwrights, incipient playwrights, messy playwrights, beginning playwrights, whatever, but that really were playwrights, had the playwright's mind. That was my second concern, that I get to teach them. And with the problem here is every autumn I get a huge box, half the size of this table, filled with scripts that I have to read.
Can you take us through some...
Only some of which are written by playwrights.
Oh, right. Well, those novelists, those nascent novelists trying early. Mm-hmm. Can you take us through some specifics of when you decide to take on a student as a teacher now? And obviously, I mean, I assume everyone is slightly different, but is there a process, is there any kind of basic process that you would take a student through?
Well, you see, the playwrights, the young playwrights, usually young, are in such different stages of their awareness of their playwriting hood. When I take them, some of them have just written 8 or 10 pages, and am I a playwright? And there they are, yes, they are a playwright. And others have written 2 or 3 or 4 plays. So I can't really, it's hard to generalize there. What we do I have 2 classes. What we do in the first is, no, in the second class, those playwrights who I think have written a play that is ready to be seen on stage. We do, because we have a very good school of theater at the University of Houston, a lot of actors, and Peter Hall teaches directing there, which is pretty good whenever he shows up.
Right.
He's a very busy guy. Right. We do full productions of 5 or 6 of the plays every spring. And the other 10 or 12, we sit around and we discuss practical matters about playwriting, using as reference to the plays that they have submitted to get into the course. And of course, all the students have to read each other's plays and try to be honest about their reaction to each other's work, and try to be honest about other people's reaction to their work, too,
Right.
which is not easy.
Right. Do you direct some of the plays that the playwrights have done?
I supervise.
But do you choose the directors?
I choose the directors. I try to fit the directors with the plays I think that they will be most sympathetic to.
Because one of the things that I heard you say the other day that I want to work toward, I don't think I want to deal with this now, is that you grew up in an era when your producers understood that the playwright was the boss, or
That's
the
right.
most important thing. And I think part of what I want to get to is, does every playwright deserve that at all stages of their career?
Every playwright deserves the opportunity to be treated fairly.
In a collaborative, in a collaborative fashion.
Yeah, but the theater does begin with the word. The literary arts begin with the word. It begins with the play. And the collaborative aspect of playwriting is after the play is written. It has nothing to do with the creation of the work of art. It has to do with translating it from a complete work of art on the page to a complete work of art on the stage.
I think it's a very important point, because I mean, a painter paints by himself and then he puts it out there and it's done. You can react to
but
it.
there are some dealers who say, now you shouldn't show this one, or that one would be better upside down, or stuff like that.
Right.
You run into commercial problems. But the creative act is a solo act.
Right, I think that, and a wonderful one when it works.
But how does anybody know whether they're a playwright? Intuition, practice.
But do you find, I'm trying to get at some generalities, when a young playwright submits a play to you at Houston that you are interested in, do you tend to think it's the characters that interest you, or that you can have...
No, what interests me is the mind
at work.
The mind that creates these characters and puts them in these situations and tries to get them out of the dilemmas that the playwright has put them in. That's what interests me.
See, and the idea of you being a teacher is so fascinating, because you, from my standpoint as a theater goer, your plays cover an entire spectrum of plays that have all kinds of different...
You know, I get so many scripts. I get a lot of screenplays, which I can't teach because I don't think it should be taught.
Have you ever done one?
No, of course not.
So let somebody else deal with it.
Yeah. Some plays that get submitted to me, obviously the person who wrote them, I won't call him a playwright necessarily, the person who wrote them has learned how other people write plays and has learned to imitate right and left, and I don't care about those.
But see, that's interesting. But isn't there an aspect of all art that people start imitating that which they know?
There's a difference between being an imitator for the sake of being an imitator and learning from your predecessors and your betters by imitation, by appropriation, by various other things. As they say, bad writers borrow and great writers steal. Of course, sure.
Bad writers borrow.
I tell my playwriting students, don't be a self-conscious primitive. You should know the entire history of playwriting. You should know what everybody else has done. You should familiarize yourself by seeing and by reading, especially reading, all the plays from the Greeks right on up to the present.
And so can you usually tell that a playwright has a voice if they've done that study, and the ones who tend to be imitative are ones who may have only read 6 plays? Or
no,
what?
there are some people, well, it's very interesting. August Wilson, who was not a bad playwright.
Not bad.
Gave an interview in the New Yorker. There was a piece about him in the New Yorker a few weeks ago, in which he says that he's seen very, very few plays in his life.
Other than his, well...
Other than his own.
I was going to say, one assumes he's seen.
That would keep him busy.
Do you as a teacher, do you see that in his plays?
Well, I have a little problem with his sense of time. I think most of his plays are a little too long, but then again, I think most plays are a little too long.
Oh, I agree with you. But you think that if he perhaps opened up to seeing a lot more, he might...
I don't know. He's made a choice.
Yeah, no, I admire him. Absolutely.
That's fine.
But I do remember a casting director once, a theater casting director priding herself on never watching television or movies, which I thought sounded a little provincial to me, but I can understand that. Did you have great teachers?
I was adopted into a wealthy family that sent me to very good private schools. And so I started writing when I was very, very young. I started writing poetry when I was 8, perhaps, or 9, and 2 novels in my teens, and a 3-act sex farce when I was 12.
Just because you felt doing it? You just...
Yeah, I was a writer. I knew I was a writer. I didn't really figure out that what I really was a playwright until I was 29, aside from that 3-act sex farce.
Right, right. Which has been seen or never?
No, I think my mother threw it away.
Oh, how dare she?
My first critic. That may be fairly
But she didn't stop. I mean, if she did throw it away, she didn't stop you.
Well, no, she was like most parents. Try to discourage creativity in the young right away.
Be a lawyer.
Yeah, be a lawyer. Be a doctor, you know.
But the family was in show business.
No, they weren't.
Well, you know.
Well, they'd been involved in the management of vaudeville theaters. It had nothing to do with performance or anything. It's very interesting. Most young people, by nature, are creative. Creativity in the very young is wonderful. You see these exhibits of paintings and drawings by 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students, and they're extraordinary work. They look like the work of major 20th century artists without any intention of imitating. Kids are naturally creative, I think. It's beaten out of them by well-intentioned parents and impatient teachers. It's a shame. So every spring I go down to Sarasota, Florida. There is in Florida, in the public schools of Florida, a playwriting program
in the public schools,
where young kids, from the beginning, the minute they go to secondary school, they're encouraged to write. And every May at the theater in Sarasota, Florida, 112 plays, short plays, by kids from the age of 6 to 18 are performed.
Wow, have you seen?
I've seen a lot of them, and they're wonderful. They're beautifully creative. Now, not all these kids are going to go on and be playwrights, but a lot of them could, I think.
But do you encourage them at that point?
Of course, yeah. Of course. I try to encourage their parents also to let them do what they need to do and find out the nature of their creativity.
Do you think that part of encouraging young playwrights is to prevent them from becoming more sophisticated to their own disadvantage? Or I don't know if I've said that right.
I don't know that true sophistication is a problem in this country.
Leave that one, I guess, and go on. But because I know you did go, as you said, to some fancy schools.
Yeah, well, they were good schools. I guess they were fancy, but they were good. And I had some good teachers who encouraged my ludicrous forays into prose writing and poetry and all the rest, and my interest in classical music, which is very important for a young playwright to know a good deal about classical music, by the way, a great deal, very important.
That's a good point.
They encouraged my sillinesses, and I'm very grateful they did.
And when you had your first play produced, because I also want to ask about your students, how does, if say, for example, somebody's gone through your program at Houston or gone through your classes, and there's a play that you think is wonderful, and it's been produced there, and it's been done wonderfully well. What's the next step for that playwright?
The next step for that playwright is to find somebody in the so-called professional theater who is interested in having something to do with the play, and I encourage the playwright. The first thing that any writer must do, the minute he's written a piece, is have it copyright. Right. Before it's shown or to anybody.
That's a very important...
Very important. Copyright your work instantly before anybody sees it. And then send it out to theater groups that you think are sympathetic to the kind of work that you do. It's the only way to do it.
But do you also, as a teacher, can you call places that have done Albee plays and say, I think you should do a Schwartz play because he's a wonderful...
I can help push from time to time I have, sure, of course. Yeah.
Well, because I think it is a community, and I think that that's not to be denied.
Yeah, look, I have to take a total of 16 students every spring. There are not 16 playwrights writing in the United States who are any good. When you come right down,
there aren't 16 playwrights in
the world, maybe, who are any good. And so I have to take some who are less interesting than others. But my one standard is, this person is creative. This person thinks creatively and thinks like a playwright. Now, this is something that I can intuit. There's nothing that goes on the page. There's no way the words are put down aside from the mind of the playwright that indicates to me that this person by nature is a playwright. Not an accomplished one yet, not a complete one, stumbling,
right,
but a true playwright.
With something on his mind, soul, heart, something that says, and you can encourage that.
Sure.
Have you ever gotten to a point as a teacher where you've said, I don't think that character should die in the third act or whatever, and the playwright says, oh, no, that character must die?
The most important bit of advice I give to my young playwriting students is, in your first play, you will probably have, if you're a young male playwright, say, you will probably have a character who you will describe as, if you're 26, the character will be 25 or 27. And you will describe the character as being good-looking in a plain way. And this character, almost invariably, will be called Tom. Shades of Tennessee Williams, of course. Right. And this character is not the lead character in the play, but an important secondary character. He is your spokesman, the playwright's spokesman. And somewhere toward the end of the play, all of the action skids to a terrible halt, and Tom has a long speech in which he explains what has happened, why it has happened, what it all means, and probably what is going to happen. I tell my playwriting students, please, cut that speech. And if you're really brave, get rid of Tom.
And do they?
Most of the time, yes, they do.
But I think that's a very, very interesting insight. I mean, it is humorous, but at the same time, what I hear from that is that the people to whom you're even having that, with whom you're even having that conversation, have enough on their minds to think that there's something to say.
Yes.
As simple as...
Because I don't take people who I don't think like playwrights.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. Are there styles of plays that you find come across your desk?
We are a naturalistic society in our theater. We tend to be less happy at experimental plays than we do at kitchen sink naturalist drama. And so the majority of plays that come across are naturalistic plays.
You've written some, although
I've written a few naturalistic plays. Well,
there's always a twist or two in there.
The illusion of naturalism, right. Of course. Because theater is absolute artifice, no matter how natural it is, as we know. But no, you don't get too many experimental plays in that huge crate.
Do you find as a playwright that you've gotten inspired in your teaching? Has some idea occurred to you that...
Well, it is true. I teach only basically to learn stuff, because every play that I work with by a young playwright presents different dramatic problems that either have been solved or have to be solved. And so it's not just doing the same old stuff over and over again. Each play is an individual experience and has its own dilemmas and its own solutions. And that's the interesting part. I learn a great deal from both having to work with 15 or 16 different plays each year, and also when you teach, you discover sooner or later that you're saying things that you didn't know you knew.
That's great.
And that's nice, too. The only problem with that is you can get into sort of a routine. There's some things that you're supposed to say. And I have found once or twice over the years that I get into the middle of a paragraph that I've said many times before to my students, and right in the middle of the paragraph I'm saying to myself, this isn't true anymore. You don't believe this anymore.
And do you stop yourself?
Well, I have to find some way to get out of that paragraph.
So you don't look like you have... Yes, but you are a teacher.
Really, I think learning by teaching is very important.
I mean, I think that's
clarifies the mind.
Yeah, and also
I also tell my students, by the way, you should listen to a Bach fugue every morning before you start writing. That really clarifies the mind.
Now, how far are you willing to put the lines on classical music? You said that playwrights should learn classical music.
I say classical music because I find that the forms and structures of dramatic shape are more closely related to the sonata allegro form, to the classical musical structures, than romantic music, and also than so-called popular music.
See, I think that's vital, because form and structure is there whether it appears not to be there.
Of course, it has to be there, and you're writing a play, and whenever I'm writing a play, I think that I'm writing a piece of music. If it's a 4-character play, I think I'm writing a string quartet.
Well, see, I think that's great. I remember when I read the reviews of the play about the baby, and since the Sandbox was the first play I ever directed, you were kind enough to give my father a letter saying I could do it without royalties, which I think I had already not realized there were royalties to be paid.
I must have been mad.
I think you were, but I think it was over the time had passed. But I remember there's a character in there who is a jazz musician. And I remember as a
Well, it's
a
not
kid,
a jazz musician.
Well, I made it a jazz musician. He is
I
a
know
musician.
because you didn't pay attention to the fact that there was a score written for that play.
No, I got the score and couldn't make head or tail out of it, to be truthful.
Really?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
But
How
I
old were
was
you?
12 or 13 or something.
Okay, that's all right.
No, but it's interesting that in one of your very first plays, a musician is there.
And I had a composer friend of mine, Bill Flanagan, who was a very good composer, write a specific score because I wanted the music to be one of the characters in the play.
Which is great. Are there other plays of yours that have?
No, that's the one. I made that experiment.
No, I thought that. And you did write the libretto for one musical, or came into?
No, well, I wrote half of libretto for an opera, a one-act opera based upon Melville's Bartleby, because the librettist had a nervous breakdown or something, and I had to finish the piece. I was conned into doing some reconstructive work on a musical on its way to Broadway, and I managed to turn it in just a few weeks from a mediocre 6-month musical to something that closed before it opened.
Would you advise against doing something like that to a young playwright?
What do you mean?
If an opportunity came up, if somebody, a young playwright is given an opportunity to do something which looks doomed on its surface.
One of the other things I tell my young playwriting students is you should know every aspect of the theater. You should look at directing. You should think about directing all the time. You should familiarize yourself with the possibilities of set design, costume design, and lighting design, because all of this stuff is going to affect the way your play looks once it's off the page and once it's on the stage. And you have a responsibility to be able to talk coherently to the craftspeople in the theater.
That's a good point. You better know it. I mean, the more you have the vernacular, the easier that conversation can be. What motivated you to direct your own work?
Because I realized that when I write a play, this is helpful to young playwriting students, I think, because not everybody does it, which shocks me. When I'm sitting at my desk writing a play, I see it and I hear it as a performed play in front of me while I'm writing it. So I am the audience for the performed version of the play that I am writing it, while I am writing it. And that saves me an awful lot of time. I don't have to rewrite anywhere near as much, because I can tell whether a scene is holding my attention or not.
Do you have actors in your mind?
No. I have characters.
Characters. So
I don't think any playwright should write with certain actors in mind.
Have you ever?
No, because you would write a role rather than a character. That would be a bad thing.
Interesting that the musical theater seems to have a lot of roles that were written for specific, but maybe they're not.
The majority of musical theater is manufacture. Let's not talk about the majority of musical theater.
No, let's not. But it's a collaboration of a kind that is less solitary than playwriting. Certainly.
Of course it is. Yes. Well, of course you have composers and book writers and
they're in the room with you when you're at the typewriter.
And librettists and choreographers, and you have an awful lot of people. And if you can get them all together, if there's sessions with their psychiatrist can be worked out so they can all meet together, you know, then you have. I also tell playwriting students never be psychoanalyzed.
Never be psychoanalyzed.
No, of course not.
Have you ever?
No.
That's very interesting. So that whatever's in there, have it come out through your art.
Yeah, because you see, too much psychiatry is still aimed at adjusting people to society rather than to themselves, which is, you know, inadequate.
That's a profound thought.
And anybody who's in the creative arts is both within a society and also standing somewhere outside of a society, to being able to observe. I mean, we all write plays because we want people to stop behaving the way they do and behaving the way we think they should. That's why we write plays. Every playwright writes a play for that reason. I mean, aside from so many people whose first plays are revenge plays, you know, killing their parents.
Right. You don't have a revenge play, do you?
Well, The American Dream was a pretty good one.
Okay.
That was number 3.
What what kind of reaction to your work pleases you the most?
Well, of course, intelligent response, patience, the ability to take the play on its own terms, not expect it to be something other than it wants to be. Whenever I go to the theater, I want to be startled and surprised, astonished, as Walter Kerr put it. Whenever I go to the theater, I want to see something like I've never seen before, or had a kind of experience that I haven't had before. And one of the problems with our theater is so many people go to it saying, well, now, there's only one kind of play that I'm going to like, and it's got to make me happy.
Right.
And I don't want any problems. Life is tough enough. And so a lot of more serious theater is not accepted by majority audiences who are being very badly trained as to what the nature of the art experience is. And the big problem here is that a lot of young playwrights who are interested in making a living, they begin to understand that unless they compromise and soften the edges of what they're doing, and maybe write a little happier, they're not going to make a living.
Have any of your plays been compromised?
I'd like to think not. There was only one experience I had in the theater where a play, an adaptation that I'd done, got completely away from me, where I couldn't control the producer, the director, and some of the actors. And it was a disaster, a really disaster. It was an awful experience. I learned a great deal from that. We should never, any playwright should ever think that he's learned as much as he possibly can about the wonders or the horrors of theater.
I wanted to go back to the question we touched on earlier about directing, because you have directed.
Yes, I didn't answer that.
That's
question,
all right. That's okay. But you answered it interestingly.
No. It occurred to me that nobody has the access to exactly what I saw and what I heard when I was writing the play that I do. And so why shouldn't I direct it as well? Why shouldn't I learn to be a director? And I finally learned to be a pretty good director.
And did you find there were moments where you wanted somebody else to bounce something off who wasn't there?
Sure. Oh, yeah, of course. Yes. It's awfully lonely up there if you're directing your own work.
I would think so.
Yeah, it can be pretty lonely.
So.
And so for the most part, I've directed a lot of my plays, the world premieres, mostly in Europe. But I like to work with a director that I can really have a good communication with, and yeah.
I mean, certainly I felt seeing the play about the baby that it was so, I mean, it was, I thought, brilliantly directed. I mean, I didn't know the play, but there was nothing in it that I didn't think was impeccable.
Very nicely directed. It's the third production of that play. It was done first in London at the Almeida Theatre with Howard Davies doing a very nice production. And then I directed it myself at the first American production at the Alley Theatre in Houston the previous year. And as a result of that, we put together this production.
And I mean, they're obviously related because the play is the same, but were they physically very different?
The stages were different. The Alley Theatre was a huge 800-seat theatre, much too big, 900-seat, much too big for the play, with an enormously wide stage, which demanded a different kind of staging. When we got to the Century Theatre on 15th Street, and we have this absolutely square opening, we needed a totally different kind of set. So the set designer and the director and I sat down and worked out something that would work for that particular space.
But it sounds like you gave yourself the director the biggest challenge to do that in the theater that was too big for it.
Yeah. Yes.
That you didn't want anybody else to mess it up, or did you?
I don't remember why I did. I've directed a lot at the Alley Theatre, a lot of my plays.
Do you believe in the role of a dramaturg?
Well, there are some good dramaturgs and there's some appalling dramaturgs. If a dramaturg is doing the proper dramaturgical job, which is to read things for the producer, who usually can't read, and to check historical accuracy and things like that, and try to get the right actors for stuff and all of that, fine. But if the dramaturg is there to make the play safe for the audience, and to try to lean on the playwright and the director to compromise, which most dramaturgs in our regional theaters seem to be doing, then I think they should be shot.
But that also goes back to your obviously key notion that it starts with the playwright, and the playwright really has to be the boss. And I assume stand-up to a lot of people who are either paid for their opinion or,
Yes. We playwrights have in our contract for any professional production sufficient protections. Nobody may change a word of our text without our permission. And if we do let somebody change a word in our text, we own it. No cuts, no changes without our permission. We have approval of the director, we have approval of the actors. And some of us get other approvals, the size of the theater and the designers and all the rest. We're totally protected. Our artistic integrity.
Nobody can protect.
There are some young playwrights, we've talked about them before, who got a couple of crying kids at home,
right,
who will make compromises to get their play on, but they don't have to.
I think that, and that's probably something you as a teacher say a fair amount of.
I warn them. I say, you've got to make these decisions yourself. You are protected if you want to be protected, but nobody can protect you from yourself.
Yeah. Do you think your students can be taught basic play construction? Think it can be taught?
What is basic play construction? I'm not sure what that is.
Maybe it doesn't exist.
I tell them...
Sonata form, maybe.
I tell them a definition of a play is very simply that which is more effective on stage than it would be anywhere else. It has nothing to do with subject matter, it has nothing to do with style, it has nothing to do with duration. Nothing. The inevitability of the piece to the stage. That's the only definition of what a play is.
Now, have you ever been called upon to do an adaptation of one of your own plays for the movies or for television?
No, only 2 of my plays have been made into films. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and A Delicate Balance, and in neither case was there really a screenplay.
Which means what? Which
means that the play that I wrote was filmed.
Right. Although somebody was credited. Didn't Ernest Lehman take the credit for
Well, he was the
Virginia
producer,
Woolf?
and he may have written a couple of screenplays which weren't used, and he paid himself, I think, $350,000.
And how much had you been paid?
I don't remember.
Not that much, probably.
More.
More, good. Well, you should.
But I had to share it with my producers.
Were you happy with that movie?
Well, considering what they could have done with it, yeah.
I mean,
I've been promised Betty Davis and James Mason.
And you got Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Perkins?
Yeah.
Well,
it's called Hollywood.
But I could see it in those days that could have been a disappointment. But
well, no, the movie was pretty good. I mean, the fact that there was no real screenplay which distorted my intention, that was nice.
But I think that's important. But so you had in your contract you had control over that?
No, you have a play produced. Here's the difference and why playwrights are so nicely protected. When we playwrights have a play done, we are leasing the production rights. We retain absolute ownership of the play. When you sell a play to a movie, you're selling it. You're not leasing the rights. You are selling the movie studio permission to do whatever they want to with it.
Which is why you get paid a lot of money for that.
Right, yeah, sure. Your soul goes with it half the time.
Well,
but I've been lucky. I've turned down many movie sale offers because they didn't want to retain the integrity of the piece.
And do you regret any of those?
No. Mm-hmm. Life is too short.
I agree. Have you turned down productions of your plays, like the production of Virginia Woolf that told you that it was really a gay story?
Oh, I've turned down quite a few productions. Sure, if I think the actors are wrong and stuff like that, you have to. There's your stuff out there.
But so
I tell my playwriting students that every time you get involved with anything to do with one of your plays, remember, you take the credit and you take the blame. And don't put yourself in compromised positions so that other people are going to be able to do that. You've got to be brave enough to take your own blame and your own credit.
Is there a career to be made as a playwright? Can you be compensated properly?
You mean economically?
Economically.
Well, they say that you can't make a living in the theater. You can make a killing, but you can't make a living.
But you've made a living?
Yeah, I've managed to make a living.
A killing?
Now and again.
Okay.
More a living than a killing. It's interesting that those are opposite terms, isn't it?
A killing and a living.
And a killing.
Oh, yes.
That's very interesting.
See, wordplay.
I never thought about that before.
It'll be a play.
It depends, can you make a living being a playwright? It depends on what your standards are. I remember when my first play, The Zoo Story, was done, its world premiere in then West Berlin,
right,
in German. I was delivering telegrams for Western Union in New York, getting $48 a week plus tips. And I quit that job and went to West Berlin to see my play, where it was very well received. went back to New York, where instantly they wanted to do it off-Broadway. We opened, and I was getting $75 a week. That was wonderful.
That was,
God, buy Western Union.
Yes,
you know,
I'm a playwright now.
Never crossed my path again. That was wonderful. But if you feel that you have to make thousands of dollars a week, or you're not going to be happy, go out in Hollywood and write screenplays. Yeah.
Now, how on earth did Edward Albee's first play get produced in Berlin?
Because when I wrote it, there really was no off-Broadway to speak of, and nobody wanted an hour-long, grumpy play by an unknown American about a couple of guys in Central Park talking, and one of them ending up dead. But I had some very good friends who sent the play around Europe, and finally it ended up being translated and produced in West Berlin on a double bill with Samuel Beckett's Krapp's Last Tape, both in German.
But you had tried to get it produced here first?
Yeah, I didn't know much. I didn't know what you did with a play once you finished it. I knew a lot about theater. I'd been going to theater ever since I was very young. But it never occurred to me that you were supposed to send a play to people or anything like that. That's why I spend so much of my time with my young playwriting students, giving them great practical advice on what to do and what to watch out for and how to market your play. Very important.
That's great. So that part of playwriting is art and part of it is business.
Of course, yes. And you better know both.
Yeah, important point. Do you think because of the regional theater movement in America today, young playwrights don't have to send their plays to Berlin or take those kind of risks?
Well, I was very fortunate that I did, because, boy, the publicity that I got. Young American playwright can't get his work done in America, has to have it done in German, in West Berlin first. You know, that made my day. Yeah, it's a lot easier. There are a lot of regional theaters, 120 or 130 now, the majority of which are interested in new plays, not terribly interested in very avant-garde ones,
right,
or very obscure ones. No, if a play is really too experimental or too tough or too serious, it'll be turned down just as quickly by the regional theaters as it will by the criminals in New York. But
your friends, our friends.
They are criminals. Talking about producers more than anything else.
Do you think are there any fundamentals that you? I mean, we've talked about a lot of aspects of what the young playwrights in your classes are all about. But are there fundamentals? I mean, if a 38 set play comes in, or if a character, I mean,
I warn them that it's more likely you're going to have a production of a 3-character play with 1 set than you are with a 35-character play with 9 set changes, just economically.
The business kicking in.
Sure. And if you can find some way to avoid destroying your chances of production, find that way. But there are going to be some times when the play wants to be 9 hours long, and that's the only way it can be effective. You take your chances.
Have you written any 9-hour plays?
No, I haven't. The longest one I've written was Who Was Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is just under 3 hours.
But action-packed and...
I can conceive, however, I've seen the No theater in Japan, the Bunraku, the puppet theater in Japan, where the plays go on for hours, and I've been fascinated by them.
But I assume that your comment about August Wilson earlier is that the kind of play August Wilson writes and what the characters and the situations, you as an audience member feel it may be best served if it were shorter.
That's the person. I don't want to.
No, I mean I don't want to
be leaning on August here. I think he's a very, very good playwright, and he writes beautifully. It's just every once in a while I become a little impatient.
I want to ask a little.
That may be more about me than
That's
August.
all right. You know, we're all that way. I was, I have to say, fascinated when I read about the notion that somebody had taken it upon him or herself, I don't remember who it was, to decide that Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf was actually a play about 2 gay couples.
You know how that came about, don't you?
No, I don't. How did it?
There was some movie critic, I think, writing for one of the news magazines, that when the film came out, this is my memory of it, okay. I could be wrong, said, I admire this play a lot. I admire the characters. I admire the dramatic situation. But I, as a critic, cannot accept it as an accurate portrayal of a heterosexual relationship. And this is called the critical fallacy, by the way.
Right.
And since I cannot accept it as that, it cannot be that.
A critic.
And also, since I happen to be gay and have been perfectly happy and not making any secrets about it all of my life, of course, it was an illogical assumption for this particular critic to make. But I know the time to time, and I know after that information was released, I started talking to people who were playing Martha. You know, I asked Uta Hagen, I asked Elizabeth Taylor, I asked various people, do you think you're playing a guy? You know, it never occurred to any of them, and it never occurred to me either. And so, these few productions that people took what this critic's response was and decided, well, obviously it's a heavily disguised play about two gay couples, and tried to produce it, I closed it down, because it's not.
Yeah, see, I think it's a very important thing where the playwright, you know, you acknowledge that it comes from the subconscious. Mm-hmm. But once you write it, and for somebody to say, oh, well, your subconscious was actually saying something other than what you thought it was saying is a little presumptuous.
You know, there was a drama critic in New York, Stanley Kaufman, mm-hmm. who went on to lesser things, I'm happy to say, who wrote, I thought, an appalling article in the New York Times, not mentioning the names of the playwrights he was defaming, but in which he said that our theater, the American theater, is being just dangerously injured by gay playwrights who are pretending to write about straight situations when they're all really writing about gays. It was a loathsome and cowardly article.
Cowardly, it sounds.
Yes. And obviously he was talking about me and Tennessee Williams and Bill Inge, the three who... and so I talked to Tennessee about it, and I said, hey, Ten, did you know that you were really writing about guys all the time and pretending that they were women? Did you know that Blanche in Streetcar is a guy? we had a big laugh over that.
I think that's great. A question again. I don't want to harp on the class, but do you outline plays? Do you think there are structural things?
I probably do outline them, but I reveal that to myself while I'm writing. I write my plays down on paper to find out why I'm writing them. Now, I imagine they're reasonably well organized in the unconscious, but I don't make long notes as to what should happen in scene 3 of Act 1. What if I'm writing along and I get to scene 3 of Act 1 and I've changed my mind?
Right.
What do I do? Look at my notes and say, oh, you can't do that because you've already decided what's going to happen?
Right.
Here's an interesting thing. I also tell my students, write your plays in sequence, from the beginning of the play to the end. Don't jump around. Because once when I was writing Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, I was happily in the middle of the second act, I think, and I got an idea for a scene for the third act. I always knew it was going to be in 3 acts. And 5 or 6 pages, and I wrote them. Then I went back and finished the second act, and a few weeks later started writing the third act. And I remembered, oh, you've written 4 or 5 pages here for the third act already. I went and I got them out, and I looked at them, I read them. Pretty good writing, I thought. Really nice stuff. I tried to get the characters to do those scenes. They wouldn't. I had written it before I knew
where they were,
what was really supposed to be happening in the third act.
Did you toss it out, or did you put it in the second act?
No, I threw it away.
Threw it away.
Yeah. It's probably in the theater collection of the New York Public Library somewhere.
But don't put it in your production. Don't go find it and have somebody.
But
really, that's the one thing I think.
You
know, when people like you put your papers in a proper place, I always fear that somebody's going to go and say, "Oh, look, here's the missing scene from the third act that he always meant to be there."
Well, that will happen after I die, not until, because I control
but look
things
at this
pretty
tape,
well.
people.
But I tell my students, write in sequence.
That's a very important lesson.
I also tell them, know your characters pretty well before you write them. I do a kind of author's version of actor's improvisation with my characters before I trust them to be in my play. If I know who my characters are, let's say, I'll take a walk and think up some situation that can't be in the play. And I will invent dialogue for the characters, put them in a situation that can't be in the play. And if they can handle themselves as 3-dimensional characters in an improvised situation, then I know that I know them well enough to trust them in the play.
And you will take a literal walk? You'll walk in the park?
Yes, I have a house on the ocean out in Montauk.
Oh.
Where I do most of my writing, and I get walk on the beach and have wonderful times.
Oh, that's great. Have you set any of your plays in your house, or?
No, but I've set several plays on the beach.
I think that's...
including one that you had something to do with called Seascape. Sandbox.
The Sandbox. Oh, yes, of course. And my production was very good. I actually directed a production in school, which I think we paid the royalties for, with Whit Stillman, who's now a movie director, playing the young man. I realized that the other day. But do you feel, and this is a terrible question, and you're going to reject it, but I'll say it anyway. I felt when I read the reviews of the play about the baby, I thought, oh, this is kind of Sue's story. This is kind of an arc, Sue's story to what I'm reading about this play. Do you ever think that this is sort of a play that you've written now is kind of a revisiting something from before, or these characters are talking to me and they haven't talked to me in 25 years? Or?
I don't find any relationship between the two plays.
No, once I saw it, it's in the setting, I think. In the sort of
every play you write, I also tell my students this, should be the first play that you've ever written. You must never think about yourself in the third person. You must not relate what you're writing now to what you've related before.
Is that sort of the way to importantitis, if you're going to write?
Yes. You think about yourself in the third person. It's terribly dangerous. You probably should be writing, every time you write a play, having come to the writing it with full knowledge of what the history of theater, which you really should have. Then you write the first play that anybody has ever written. You must put yourself in that state of creative innocence to accomplish it.
I assume you also feel that playwrights should continue to go to theater today, whether it's good or bad?
I think they should go to theater, but I tell young playwrights, if you're going to go see a production of a play, read the play, and then see the production. You've got to learn the difference between what a play really is and what the production of the play tells you. Quite often there are different experiences, sometimes better, sometimes worse.
And when is a play finished?
Play is finished when the playwright abandons it.
Do you rewrite a lot?
No, I don't. I do very few revisions in production. A couple of things, that speech is too long, or I didn't really do what I needed to in that scene. I better add a couple of things. But no, I don't. I wait a long time before I write a play down.
So it's churning around.
I'll keep it in my head for a long time until it wants to translate itself into something coherent on the page.
Do you have maybe one or two or more plays going on in your mind at one time?
Yes, usually.
And decide which one is going to...
Varying degrees of construction, yeah. And whichever one is finished in the head first goes onto the page.
Are any of the plays submitted to your class and the students, do they ever come finished?
Well, we all think we finished something. I'm not necessarily sure that we ever completely do. Are there any playwright who's ever been totally satisfied with a play that he's written? I hope not.
Yeah, I doubt it. Have you ever abandoned a play? Have gotten to a point where I thought those...
I abandoned one, and I took parts of it and I put it in a couple of other plays, yes.
Oh, good. Recycle.
It was a highly stylized play, and the only characters on stage, as I remember it, were a rock and a large plant.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I thought it was wonderful, yeah. A lot of good writing in it, but it was a little static.
I love what you said earlier about the surprise in the theater. I thought that was the word that you used, and I wanted to ask...
It was a short play, by the way.
Well, that's right. I would go to it. I won't direct it. No, that career it was over. Difference between working in England and working in America in terms of the surprise factor of the theater. Do you think that's...
English theater is getting more and more like American theater. It is being corrupted by the Broadway complex. And the West End of London now is turning into another version of Broadway where it's all success based upon commercial success. Fortunately in London they have the National Theatre, the Royal Shakespeare Company, the Almeida, the Royal Court, and 2 or 3 other subsidized experimental theatres where they do the very serious work. But the West End is turning very much into Broadway.
But the feeder theatres in England are still there and strong?
There aren't as many regional theatres. London is the theatre centre, but since it does have these theatres that I mentioned,
right,
most of the new good work comes out of them and then fans around England.
And
of course, we must remember that everything in England is no longer than a 2-hour train ride from everywhere else. Everything is close to London.
Do you find those theatres have come after you, or have you sent plays to them to be done there, in the premieres that have been done in those theatres in England?
I remember the first production I had in London was The Zoo Story. They came to me, I think. with a small theater.
But there's a new production of yours being done. The premiere is being done by Almeida. Am I wrong? Or
Of what?
a new play of yours? I thought.
No, the Almeida did the play about the baby. I have two, as we talk, I have two plays at the National Theater, two short plays, Marriage Play and Finding the Sun, directed by Anthony Page. Nice productions, but those were plays that I wrote in the 80s.
Do you think one-act plays are an important tool to learning how to be a playwright, or do you think you encourage?
Then the
Not my words.
two or three-act play is preposterous nonsense. A play should be as long as it needs to be, not a second longer, not a second shorter. It should be, if it needs an intermission, it should have one. If it doesn't need it, it shouldn't have one. Everybody should remember that Oedipus Rex is a one-act play.
I didn't realize that.
Yes, it is.
But have you consciously written one-act plays, or a one-act play, rather?
I have been aware when I've begun writing a play that this is probably going to be maybe an hour long or something like that, but sometimes I'm mistaken.
They surprise you.
Yeah. A play should be as long as it needs to be, and if a play, I tell this to my students too, if you've written a play to the proper length, no matter how long it is, it's not too long.
Right.
I saw a very, very interesting thing happen on Broadway a few years ago. A playwright that I respect a lot had a play done, this is maybe 15 years ago, and the critic said, this play is too long. Really, it should be cut. I went to see it, and I sat there. The play went on for quite a long time, and I came out of the theater, and I realized something. No, this play is not too long. It's too short. It got cut somewhere along the line. I did some research, and I found that about a half hour had been taken out of the play in the production process. And I read the full text, and if that had been done, the play would not have seemed too long.
Now,
isn't that paradox interesting?
It is. What did you do with that information when you discovered it?
I filed it away in my don't make that mistake yourself, Edward, filing box.
But did that playwright, did you ever have an opportunity to...
I talked to him, and he said, yeah, we did make a cut. And I said, you shouldn't have.
I mean, am I right in saying that there is a community of playwrights? I mean, you have friends who are playwrights, and you
sure.
talk to each other.
I have friends who are playwrights, enemies who are playwrights.
Well,
no, sure.
But
we as a band, we do want to help each other and talk to each other about each other's work, to be helpful, sure.
Do you have some that, and I don't want names, that you like to see your plays in an early state, or some that you don't care what they have to?
I don't let anybody see a play until I finished it.
Right.
And there are no early stages.
But once it's up and running, anybody can...
Yeah, sure. I'm interested in the opinion then, but while I'm writing it, this solo act,
It's you.
This non-collaborative act, except the collaboration that I have from Chekhov and Pirandello and Beckett looking over my shoulder.
Good guys,
all the time.
good guys.
Good guys. No, it's a solo act, and I don't show it to anybody until I think I finished it.
When it's produced, do you listen to the audience, and what do they tell you?
When I went to West Berlin for the world premiere of The Zoo Story, I knew what was going on stage, though I don't know German, but it was a good translation. I knew what was happening on stage. I was sitting on a box way up stage left, and I remembered that I kept sneaking looks at the audience to see how they were reacting to what I had done on stage. And that probably more than anything else convinced me that I was a playwright. That I was interested in whether I was communicating and whether I was having the effect on the audience that I wanted to have.
And you saw it?
Yeah, I saw it.
That's great. So do you have any final advice for a young playwright?
Don't let anybody just go. If you are a playwright, and I also tell my students this, if you can find anything else in the world to do other than being a playwright, do it. Because it's a tough racket, and virtue is not its own reward. But if you are a playwright, it doesn't matter whether you're any good or not, if you are a playwright, practice it. Because if you don't, you're going to be an unhappy person.
Keep practicing. Are you still practicing?
Of course, I hope so.
Good. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
The American Theater Wing's Guide to Careers in the Theater is a project of the American Theater Wing and the New York Public Library's Billy Rose Theater Collection, Theater on Film and Tape Archive.